Hello, and welcome to this MP4 file. I would say that it's been a while, but I feel like I say that every single time I post, so just don't expect me to post anything in like a timely manner ever. I'm always doing like 1,000 other things in my little cave. Also, I had to turn the fan off to record this and it's boiling hot, but that's besides the fact. Today, I'm going to show you how I made my Starstruck Watamote fan animation, as well as the techniques I use in a lot of my animation memes. The animation used a myriad of skills including frame-by-frame and tweened animation, designing the assets, and video editing. Stuff like cutting the audio was also involved, but I wouldn't really call that a skill or anything, at least not on such a small scale. If you want to watch the animation in question, I'll leave a link to it in the description, but it should be playing behind me right now, just without the audio. A few things I want to get into before we start the video is, obviously this is just my way of doing things and your way could be completely different, and that's totally fine. I just wanted to give some insight into how I use the software because I've had a lot of people asking about it. Something else I want to state before getting into my process are the resources and programs I've used. The programs I used were Clip Studio Paint EX and Davinci Resolve, and the only graphic I didn't make in my asset was from Hawaii Scans on Blogspot. Everything I'm going to list here will also be linked in the description if you want to watch these tutorials because I highly recommend them. All tweened animations I've done are thanks to Nomad R Productions on YouTube. Please watch his tutorials if you want to rig/tween anything in Davinci Resolve. They taught me so much. The specific tutorials I watched were animate any character in Davinci Resolve, how to lip sync in Davinci Resolve, and level up your animations with compositing in Davinci Resolve. Although the specific execution of things may be different in his videos, they taught me fundamentals of using DaVinci's Fusion tab, which I was able to expand upon. I also want to clarify, I'm not an expert on all of these things and some information may be wrong, but this is more of a tutorial for people who want to achieve something similar rather than teach you the fundamentals of animation, drawing, or editing. This is an analysis of my own animation process and what works for me. Now that we got through that, we can actually get into my animation specifically. Part 1, the storyboard. Once again, you'll have the storyboard playing behind me while I talk about the process. I do something a little interesting in my animation process, which is that I go straight from cutting the audio to making the animatic/storyboard. I don't board something, in the normal way that you format it and then put those into an animatic. I kind of just do the animatic from the get-go on the animation timeline. Now to set that up, this is how we're going to do it. First, we need to set up the canvas. After I've heard a song or watched a funny video and downloaded it, I open up Clip Studio to get animating. I always like to animate with my canvas at 4:3 aspect ratio, either 800 by 600 pixels or 1600 by 1200 pixels. And I don't really use any of the frame settings or whatever that Clip Studio provides. For frame rate, I tend to do 10 to 12 FPS, although sometimes I go insane and use 24 FPS animated on 2s. An example of a 10 FPS animation I've made is my Creep You Out animation, and an example of a 12 FPS animation I've done would be my Don't Speak German animation. I think the frame rate you want will really boil down to personal preference. If you want something more focused on still shots with minimal motion, like an animatic, a lower frame rate works well, but a lot of quote-unquote smooth animations can still be done at a lower frame rate too. See Cup Toast is a great example of this. I usually have a pretty good idea of what I want to do for my animations, and will start by laying out any keyframes. Then I'll go back to add any in-betweens I want. I like to have all of the animation boarded before I go into line art or coloring because it makes the parts feel more manageable to me. Most of my animation memes will only have 4 frames worth of frame-by-frame animation per shot, then I'll tween the rest or just have still shots. I will only use about 2 animation folders for the storyboard usually, main animation and additional moving parts. Part 2, the frame-by-frame animation. After storyboarding, I'll do the line art for all elements including the rigs and frame-by-frame. The rigs will just have all the parts in a single folder, while frame-by-frame animation will be in separate folders inside an animation folder like this. I start with line art, then the outlines for the shading and highlights, and then fill in all the colors, often on separate layers to make things like adding gradients easier, although you can also do that through mastering, editing/compositing. Part 3, drawing the rigs. The rigs can be a little complicated to figure out, and it took me a couple attempts to figure out what works best for me. I like to have a minimum of 3 to 4 parts for every rig and expand from there for more minute movements like the bangs or eyebrows. You really don't need a ton of parts to make a fluid animation if you know how to edit them well though. Mesh transformation. My rule of thumb is that if a shot is longer or a close-up, I tend to put more moving parts to make the motion look more realistic. My Kotomi and Tomoko rigs were 5 to 10 pieces each. Part 4, designing the assets. Great, now we have all the parts for the characters, but what about the background? I actually have a little cheat I've been doing for every animation I've been making lately. It's picking one image/palette to base all the background assets off of. Simple enough, right? I get most of these images from Kawaii Scans because they have a wonderful variety of cute high-res memo pad scans to use. I used this memo pad design and built all of the assets off of it. For what to do outside of that, I usually go with large color blocked elements with textures on top, so that they aren't too distracting from the actual character animation. My only exception from this was the fugitive part of the animation, since it was referencing a specific scene from the OVA. For this I used a background I drew for an animation collab a while back. Work smarter, not harder. Part 5, editing the video. Once all the parts are completed, I export all the frames as layer PNGs. You can do this in 2 ways. Put all the asset pieces on a timeline and export it as an image sequence at 12 FPS or so, or just turn on and off visibility for every part you use. I tend to use the second one, although it can feel more tedious, saving every rig to its own folder. Any looping frame-by-frame parts can also be exported as GIFs or as PNGs I'll compile together in something like EasyGIF. All parts are numbered and then put into alphabetical folders. The most amount of folders I've had is A to Q for my Joyful Thought animation. I put all multi-layer parts like lip sync and eyes into their own folders with their own numbered sequence to make it easier to bring them in to animate later. In Davinci, I replicate all the folders I use and also drag in the exported storyboard video as a base to line all the parts up. Animating the background. Although the background for this animation had quite a few moving parts per shot, I made sure to keep the actual animation of every part quite limited. I only did zooms, rotations, or had the parts sliding across the screen relatively slowly. The element I like the most is the elements popping in. I did this with a simple zoom transform, going from small to oversized and then back to normal in a total of 6 to 8 frames. Setting up and animating the rigs. I'm going to plug Nomad R Productions' rigged animation tutorial here again because it basically lays out everything I do. The basics is that you're going to create a fusion composition, go into the fusion tab, and merge all of your parts together into a node tree. For my specific case, I tend to merge all the face elements to the head and then just layer everything else how you'd expect. For these rigs, I sometimes also change the pupils to be atop the eye whites when merging the nodes to mask them accordingly. This is also where we bring in the mouth parts by selecting them all in File Explorer, or whatever Mac users use, and dragging them into the composition. This will import them as an image sequence you can then manipulate using a time speed node and custom tool. After the initial setup, I use a transform node for every part I'm moving. Once again, it's just a lot of rotating and sliding with some easing on the splines to make the motion look smooth. For the head and hair, I also tend to do a tiny amount of squash and stretch using the X and Y size / aspect transform nodes. It adds a small amount of bounciness I really like in my animations. I got this trick from my buddy Nico, aka @11waf on Twitter. For my last little animation trick, I use the DVE node. It adds a tiny bit of 3D curve by basically making the image into a flat face on a pseudo 3D plane if you change the X and Y nodes. You can also do actual 3D image stuff, but that shit scares me, so I haven't touched it. I use this for head turns mostly, although you can also use it for parts like arms or even the entire body. I didn't want to do much animating for my MERS animation, so instead I used this DVE node trick. The best tip I'll give is that a rig is made of a lot of moving parts, so keeping each movement subtle looks better than having all of them move a huge amount. Less is more. Adding extra effects. The only animated add-ons I had for this animation were the little text pop-ups here and there, otherwise the rest was fusion effects. The main one I use in almost all my animations is the paper edge effect. It takes a bit of finessing, but I tend to put it at 0.007 border width and then bring down the edge intensity and contrast to create a thick, smooth outline. I feel it really helps the characters pop from the background in a simple way that moves as they move. In some animations, I'll also add an overlay with an image sequence to give the animation texture. You can see this done in my Scott Street animation or in the background of my Gnaw and You're a Big Girl Now animations. The last thing I've been doing more recently is using the glow effect in Fusion. It gives about the same effect halation would give, but free, and makes the rigs look a bit softer, which I like a lot. Using adjustment clips. Finally, we can address the last piece of the puzzle, the adjustment clips. These basically treat all layers underneath as one big camera layer and allow you to transform them all at once. It's great for zoom-ins or quick cuts. And that's how all my current animations are done. Full hand animated AMVs and such obviously deviate from these elements, but the basics still apply to all of them. Thank you, viewer, for taking the time to watch this MP4 file, and as always, colon 3.